Okay, I'm going to go over a little bit of the details on how I make a mini zine, something that is 8.5 by 11, which is cut, sketched out, how I take that and use gouache to create an original artwork that I can then photocopy. So the first thing that I use is some Canson watercolor, and this is 9 by 12, but you know a regular sheet of paper is 8.5 by 11. So I wind up using my ruler, and I've got one of these cutting mats on my desk, a great big one, so that I can use the ruler and then go ahead and use my knife and cut directly. So I have already done that, and this is the resulting 8.5 by 11. So the next thing I need to do is kind of put the seam guidelines for where I want this, and the way I take it and have it photocopied, it has a 0.25 inch border around it. So as you're looking at your designs, you want to make sure that you've got 1/4 of an inch around it. So I will come down here, and for these, you know, each one will have 4 panels and then it's split in half. So I'll just kind of eyeball it, line it up, and I know one will be here, one will be here, one will be here, and then I will get the approximate halfway point. And having this guide on the desk is really helpful as well. It gives me a little bit more space and double check on the guides. But here, and this is going to be roughly here. So then I will be able to actually use my measuring tool to go ahead and get it sketched out in the 8 panels. As you're working on your sketching, make sure that you are very light, because the gouache, being as thin as it is, may not cover everything. You'll definitely see some pencil traces through as you work on it. So very light with pencil, and I just use a regular mechanical pencil. It does pay to get a slightly nicer eraser than what is on the end, because these almost always smear when you are trying to erase with them. So I always get a nicer artist eraser. And you can see that when you put this together, this is always the front cover and back cover, and then the pages go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and of course these are the other way around. So sketch everything out as light as you can, and be cognizant of the fact that the pencil marks will show through. Okay, so we've got everything sketched out in pencil, and now I'm going to start work on actually doing the painting for this. So I don't hand paint the lettering. That will come with a special pen that I use that I'll show you when I get ready to do that point. The first thing I will do is start painting the backgrounds in kind of a light color behind the lettering so I can still see it. I won't paint behind the actual tardigrades themselves. This is a zine about tardigrades, because I'll use the main colors for that. Working with gouache, it's something that it works wet, and it doesn't fully dry if you add something else on top of it, unlike acrylic, where you can actually use lighter colors over darker colors because it fully dries. If you re-moisten the area, it blends together. So I will not paint the background onto those areas. And some of the things that I will use for this next step, I use one of these, which is a tear-off paper palette, and it's just like a notepad, except it is kind of like a wax paper, and you can actually use this as your palette to mix colors and put it on, and then when you're done you can just tear it off and throw it away. So it makes it a little bit easier. I've got a ball jar of water, which I will replace as I need to. The brushes that I normally use are Da Vinci, and I like the acrylic brushes for this, and I think I got these from Blick Art, but I don't like using real hair, like boar's hair or horse hair, I prefer using acrylic brushes. So that's what that is. And I use a number of different kinds of gouache. These are all higher end gouache, Winsor and Newton, Da Vinci. I've kind of picked out the colors that I'm going to be using. This is Ultract, which I use as well, or Holbein, and then I've got white. So for me, generally I do have a couple different blacks. This is ivory black, but generally if I'm going to make a black for use, I will mix it up of 2 other pigments instead of using black. I go through a lot of white. So at this point, I will go ahead and start mixing the paints and get them ready. I'm going to do, for the tardigrades, a flesh tint with a little bit of sap green. I will use a flesh tint with a little bit of the burnt sienna for the Hannibal Lecter face mask. The book that the tardigrade is reading, I think, will be some shade of purple. And then I will most likely do the backgrounds for everything in blue and yellow, a really light color. I will be using pink as well for the back of the Cosmo magazine, so I'll probably use opera pink for that. So we'll go ahead and start with the lemon yellow. I'll use that for this first panel for the background. So I'll squeeze a little bit of the yellow out, and then you start mixing it with water. And they say that you want it to kind of make more of like a milk-like texture. So you can see as I start mixing it in, you want to get it to maybe a heavy cream or a milk-like consistency. So you can see as that works in what the consistency would be like that. And if you like that color, that's fine. Otherwise, you could make it lighter by adding a little bit of water and a little bit of white, which I will probably do just to make it a little bit lighter. So squeeze that out. And you can also use one of these spray bottles to add in some water like that and just spray it on. That kind of helps. So I'm going to add a little bit of white. And you just mix it around until you get the color and the consistency that you are looking for. Add more water as necessary. Add more paint as necessary. And add a little bit more water. All right, so I think that that's about what I'm looking for. And then I will just come in here and start painting. So you will see as I start painting that this is pretty thin. So, and once you paint over the pencil, you're not going to be able to erase it. Like I said before, you want to make sure that it is light enough so that it is not a distraction. I will be, directly using a pen to paint over the text, but what it is what it's going to be, because you're not going to be able to get rid of that eraser under there. So. Okay, next I'm going to go ahead and paint the 2 areas of this next cell. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of primary blue for this. And I should definitely let it be known that I am a hobbyist painter. I'm not professional. I have learned by watching 1,000 YouTube videos. I have not taken classes in this. So yeah, this all comes just from playing around with it. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to make this background a little bit darker on here. And I also, I have an easel, but I do not use an easel. For whatever reason, I feel like I can get a little bit more control going in directly and being able to move the paper around compared to using the easel and having it taped up. Now, when I paint with acrylic, sometimes I will use the easel. And with gouache, because it is a water-based and is more like watercolor, every time you go back in and work it and get it wet again, the paint becomes live again. So that's something that you need to remember. Makes it harder to do absolute layers for things like this. And you'll remember that I said that depending on the way you have this copied, because I don't sell the originals, I keep them, and I, depending on if it's a full-size zine or a mini zine like this, depends on if I have them printed or if I have them copied. And I take that to a company here in town called Allegra, and if they, for the full-size zines, they actually scan them in and they do printing of them, which is a bit more expensive. And with the printer that they use, it can go edge to edge, so there's no cutoff. So there's no margin of a 1/4 inch. It can actually just go ahead and print right to the edge. But with a mini zine, to control the cost, they actually just use a photocopier, a very nice photocopier, nicer than what I would have access to. But they use that photocopier, and the way that pulls the paper in for the actual printing, they scan it in, but when it pulls the paper in to do the printing on it, it requires a 1/4 inch all around. So when you actually go to see the finished edge of this, it will be cut off to about there. So I'm always mindful of anything that is along the bottom edge, that will be cut off, and that goes all the way around it. Because I'm recording this today, I am not listening to anything as I work, but normally I've got some kind of podcast or maybe a audiobook going. I've been listening to a podcast called Radio Rental, which is kind of like spooky stuff, but it's also funny. It's entertaining, but I'm not listening to anything today. So I can concentrate a little bit more on what I'm doing, and I can record this. So I'm just going ahead and I mix this up a little bit lighter and just adding in. You'll have to let me listen. You'll have to let me know in the comments what you listen to while you paint or work on any of your projects. I'm dipping in a little bit more water just to get a little bit better consistency. You can probably see how long it takes me to do all of this. You think about, the cost of a zine, even though you're getting a photocopy of something, the original work, obviously you spend the time to come up with the idea, then to sketch it, then to re-sketch it, then to paint it. I collect zines, so not only do I make them, but I have a huge collection, and then I've got a collection which I have shared with a local library as well. They have a teen zine library, so I've shared quite a few zines that I've purchased with them to get more people into zines, because what a great thing to be able to share with people. Gouache is my favorite out of all of the mediums that I've tried. I'd like to be able to do watercolor, but I'm just not. It doesn't seem to be my thing. I do like acrylic as well, but I think that gouache is a little bit more forgiving. I've used oil pastels, which I like really well, but I haven't used those really for a zine. And I've used chalk pastels, but they're, it concerns me a little bit about with the dust that you would breathe in. I just looked around. I did not grab a little rag. Normally I have a little rag to be able to wipe the brush on as I need to. So you always think about all the things that you didn't grab once you get sat down and get started. And you can see in some of the areas, if it does just cover the text a little bit, I do have the original sketch on paper, so I can go back and kind of look and see if there's a letter or something that I've just missed. The colors of gouache dry differently than normally with acrylics. When it's dry, what you saw when you were painting is what you get. But the colors just on gouache dry out a little bit different. Now I think I'm going to do a very light pink for the background of this next. And then I'll use the opera pink, and I'm going to add a little bit of white as well. You can see the white is always a little bit chunkier for whatever reason. This is white titanium, which is the white that I prefer. There's a couple of different whites, but I prefer the white titanium. Again, I'm going to try my best to avoid the tardigrade himself, because I will be painting him a different color. This paint is pretty thirsty. It soaks up, not the paint, the paper is thirsty, and it soaks up quite a lot of the paint pretty quick. I often find, because it's kind of porous and there's little bumps in it, little divots, that I may wind up missing a little bit, and I will go back later and just touch everything up before the project is finished. And here I've decided that before I actually start working on the details of the tardigrade here, I'm going to go ahead and paint this last panel background on this side. And then after that, I will get a couple of really tiny brushes, because the details on our tardigrade friend are going to be challenging. He's got tiny little hands, so that's going to be more of an effort to get that done. Here again, I'm just going to mix in. Again, either I dip some water from my water container, or I can use the spray to mix this up and get it to the right consistency. Sometimes I'll mix it thicker if I'm trying to cover up something more, or thinner if I'm trying to let something more come through. And I always use a slightly bigger brush to do the backgrounds. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've gotten all of the painting done, went in and did some of the detail work. I'm going to have to go in and do some more blending after all of it dries. You can see a little bit of color issue here that I'll work on, but for the most part it is done, at least for this level. So now it's time to go in and do all of the writing, and as I mentioned, I don't do that with a paintbrush. I actually use one of these Tombows, and you can get these on Amazon. They're not too expensive, and you can get them in sets of two. One's a little bit softer and one's a little bit more defined. This is the one I use for this. It's the Food No Suki, and this is the one that I use to do all of the lettering. So I will go ahead and get started on that, and we'll see you back here after I finish it. And you can see here that everything is done. I've gone through and I've touched up a couple areas. Everything has been inked in, so it is all set to go. The final thing that I do is I take it to the printer. They will scan it in and make photocopies, and that is how I put my gouache painted zines together.